The moment I heard the crash against my barn, I knew this winter storm was about to become the least of my problems. I was in my living room, watching the ice accumulate on my windows, when the sound of metal scraping wood followed by a loud bang made me jump from my couch. My coffee mug nearly slipped from my hands as I rushed to the window facing the barn. Through the thick sheets of freezing rain, I could barely make out the shape of a white SUV pressed against the side of my barn at an odd angle. My name is Xavier Lancaster, and I had moved to Cedar Rapids, Iowa 3 years ago after buying a 5-acre property on the outskirts of town. The property came with a beautiful red barn that I had spent months restoring, and I used it primarily for storage and my woodworking hobby. When I bought the place, I knew it was technically part of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA, but the previous owner assured me they rarely bothered with properties on the edge of the development like mine. I grabbed my heavy coat and boots, bracing myself for the conditions outside. The ice storm had started around 6 that morning, and by noon, everything was coated in at least an inch of solid ice. The trees looked like glass sculptures, and my driveway was essentially a skating rink leading from the main road down to my house and barn. As I made my way carefully across my yard, holding onto anything I could for support, I recognized the vehicle. It was a white Lexus SUV with a vanity plate that read Hoken 1. My stomach dropped. That was Patricia Hendricks' car. Patricia was the president of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA and had been for the past 8 years, according to my neighbors. She was exactly what you would picture when someone said, HOA Karen. Mid-50s, always perfectly coiffed blonde hair, designer clothes even for grocery shopping, and an attitude that suggested everyone around her existed solely to inconvenience her day. I had only dealt with her twice before. Once when I first moved in, and she came by to remind me that my barn needed to be painted only in approved colors, which thankfully my red paint job met. The second time was 6 months ago when she sent me a violation notice because my grass was a 1/4 inch too tall according to HOA regulations. I had measured it myself afterward and found it was actually within compliance, but she never apologized or retracted the fine she initially threatened. When I reached the barn, I found Patricia sitting in her driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. Her front passenger side was crumpled against the barn's corner post, and I could see a fresh gouge in the wood siding where she had clearly slid down the length of the barn before coming to rest. I knocked on her window. She jumped, apparently not having noticed my approach, and turned to look at me with wide eyes. For a moment, I thought I saw fear or shock, but it quickly morphed into something else entirely. She rolled down her window about 2 inches. "Are you okay?" I asked, raising my voice over the sound of ice pelting everything around us. "That looked like a nasty slide." "This is completely unacceptable," she said, her voice sharp and trembling, though whether from cold or adrenaline I could not tell. "Your driveway is a hazard." I blinked, ice already forming on my eyelashes. "Are you hurt? Do you need me to call an ambulance?" "I need you to explain why your driveway has not been cleared," she shot back. "I came down here to conduct HOA business, and I nearly died because you have failed to maintain your property according to our community standards." I took a deep breath, trying to process what was happening. "Madam, we are in the middle of an ice storm. It is actively icing right now. Even if I had cleared it an hour ago, which would have been pointless, it would be covered again. The HOA bylaws clearly state that all driveways must be maintained in a safe condition," she said, fumbling with her phone. "Section 12, paragraph 4, subsection B. Patricia, can we maybe have this conversation after we get you out of this situation?" Your car is damaged, and you are pressed against my barn in the middle of an ice storm." She finally opened her door, or tried to. It would not budge because of the angle. I moved around to the passenger side, carefully testing each step on the ice. The passenger door was crumpled, but not as badly as I had initially thought. The barn post had taken most of the impact. Patricia managed to climb over the center console and out the passenger door, which I held open for her. She was wearing completely inappropriate footwear for the conditions, leather heels with maybe half an inch of tread. The moment her foot touched the icy ground, she started to slip. I caught her arm, steadying her. "Careful," I said. "Let me help you to the house." "Remove your hand from me," she snapped, jerking away. This caused her to immediately lose her balance again, and this time she fell hard onto her side. I heard her gasp in pain. I reached down to help her up, but she held up a hand. "Do not touch me. I am calling the police. This is assault, and you are liable for the damage to my vehicle and my injuries." "I have not assaulted you," I said, feeling my patience wearing thin despite trying to stay calm. "You drove down my driveway in an ice storm, slid into my barn, and fell on ice. None of that involves me doing anything to you." She had managed to get her phone out and was trying to dial with shaking fingers. I noticed her hands were red from the cold. She was not wearing gloves either. "Patricia, please, let's get you inside where it is warm. You can make whatever calls you want from there, but you are going to get hypothermia out here." "I am not going anywhere with you," she said. "You are trying to intimidate me into not reporting your violations." A gust of wind sent a fresh sheet of ice pellets at us. I made a decision. "Fine. I am going back to my house. If you want to stay out here and freeze, that is your choice. But I am not going to stand here and argue while we both turn into popsicles." I turned and carefully made my way back to my house, using the rope I had strung between the barn and my porch that morning for exactly this purpose. When I got inside, I looked back. Patricia was still sitting on the ice, phone pressed to her ear. I could not tell if she had gotten through to anyone. I waited about 5 minutes, warming my hands by the fireplace I had going. Through the window, I could see her still out there. Despite how angry and frustrated I was with her accusations, I could not just leave another human being out in dangerous conditions. I put my coat back on and went out again. This time, I brought a blanket and a thermos of hot coffee. When I reached her, she was crying, though trying to hide it. Her phone was clutched in her hand, and I could hear the automated message saying all circuits were busy. "Patricia," I said more gently, "please come inside. I promise I am not going to hurt you or intimidate you, but you cannot stay out here. The temperature is dropping and this ice is not letting up." She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw the mask crack. She was scared, not of me, I realized, but of the situation. She had probably never been in anything like this before. "I cannot stand up," she admitted quietly. "Every time I try, I slip." "Here," I said, kneeling down carefully and spreading the blanket out. "Sit on this for now. It will give you some insulation from the ice. Then we are going to get you up and inside." "Okay," she did not argue this time. I helped maneuver the blanket under her, then took her arm firmly. "I am going to count to 3, and then we are both going to stand up together. Keep your weight on me." It took 2 attempts, but we managed to get her upright. She was shivering violently now. I kept a firm grip on her arm and guided her slowly toward the house, following the rope I had strung. It took us nearly 10 minutes to traverse what was usually a 30-second walk. Once inside, Patricia collapsed into the armchair nearest the fireplace. I brought her a dry blanket and the coffee I had poured earlier. She took it with shaking hands. "Thank you," she whispered. I nodded and went to check my own phone. The power was still on, surprisingly, but my cell service was spotty at best. I managed to pull up the weather report. The ice storm was expected to continue for at least another 6 hours, with the worst of it happening in the next 2 to 3 hours. "Looks like you are going to be here for a while," I said. "The roads are completely impassable. Even the main highway is closed according to this." Patricia did not respond. She was staring into the fireplace, both hands wrapped around the coffee mug. Her hair, usually so perfectly styled, was wet and plastered to her head. Her makeup had run from a combination of ice melt and tears. I went to the kitchen and started making some soup. It seemed like the appropriate thing to do given the circumstances. As I worked, I kept glancing into the living room. Patricia had not moved. She just sat there, staring at the fire. About 20 minutes later, I brought her a bowl of chicken noodle soup and some crackers. She took it without comment and started eating mechanically. "I need to call my husband," she said after a while. "He will be worried." "You can try," I said, handing her my landline phone. "Cell service is pretty much out, but the landline is still working." She dialed a number and waited. I could hear it ringing through. Then I heard a man's voice answer. "Robert, it is me," she said. "I am fine, but I got caught in the storm. I am at one of the properties on the edge of the development. Xavier Lancaster's place. No, I am fine. The car is damaged. It slid into his barn." "No, I am not hurt badly, just some bruises." "Yes, no, he has been. He has been helpful. Okay, I will. Yes, I love you too." She hung up and handed the phone back to me. "My husband says thank you for taking me in." "Of course," I said. "I was not going to leave you out there." We sat in silence for a while. The only sounds were the fire crackling and the continuous pelting of ice against the windows. It was almost hypnotic. "I should not have come out here today," Patricia said suddenly. "Robert told me not to. He said the storm was going to be bad. But I had a violation to deliver to you, and I wanted to get it done before the weekend." I turned to look at her. "A violation? For what?" She had the grace to look embarrassed. "Your barn. Someone reported that you have been running a business out of it without proper permits or HOA approval." I laughed, though there was no humor in it. "A business? I do woodworking as a hobby. I have made maybe 3 pieces of furniture in the past year, all for myself or as gifts to friends. The complaint said you had people coming and going and that there was noise at odd hours." "I sometimes work late at night when I cannot sleep," I admitted. "And yes, occasionally a friend stops by, but I am not running a business." "You could have just called me or sent an email instead of driving out here in an ice storm to deliver a violation notice for something that is not even happening." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I suppose that would have made more sense." "Why did you really come out here?" I asked. "Because that seems like a pretty flimsy excuse to risk your life." She was silent for so long I thought she was not going to answer. Then she sighed. "Because I wanted to catch you in the act. I wanted to see for myself if the complaints were true, so I could issue a fine and maybe even force you to cease and desist. I have been president of this HOA for 8 years, and I take my responsibilities seriously. Too seriously, according to my husband." "You mean you wanted to find a reason to fine me?" I said flatly. "Yes," she admitted. "You have to understand this HOA has rules for a reason. They maintain property values and ensure everyone's quality of life. But they also need to be applied fairly and reasonably," I countered. "And breaking rules that do not exist or are being interpreted in bad faith is not maintaining anything except your own power." Patricia flinched at that. "You think that is what I am doing? Maintaining power? What else would you call it? You came out here in dangerous weather to deliver a violation for something you had no proof of, just because someone complained. You did not investigate. You did not reach out to me first. You just assumed I was guilty and wanted to catch me in the act. That is not." She started, then stopped. That is exactly what I did, is it not? We lapsed into silence again. Outside, the storm continued its assault. I could hear tree branches cracking under the weight of the ice. Every so often, there would be a loud snap as another one gave way. I think I have been doing this wrong, Patricia said quietly. Robert has been saying it for years, but I did not want to hear it. I thought I was helping the community. I thought I was protecting everyone's investments. You probably thought you were, I said. But somewhere along the way, it became more about control than community. She looked at me with something like surprise. How did you get so wise? I laughed. I am not wise. I am just a guy who wanted to live on a piece of land with a barn where I could do some woodworking in peace. But I have had enough bad bosses and authority figures in my life to recognize when someone is more interested in the power than the purpose. Patricia nodded slowly. I think I need to resign from the HOA board. Maybe, I said. Or maybe you need to change how you approach it. Talk to people first. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Recognize that rules are meant to serve the community, not the other way around. She was quiet, considering this. Then she said, I am sorry I blamed you for my accident. And I am sorry I was going to fine you for something you were not even doing. Apology accepted, I said. And for what it is worth, I hope you are not too badly hurt. We should probably check you over for any serious injuries. She moved her arms and legs experimentally. I am sore, but I do not think anything is broken. I will probably have some spectacular bruises tomorrow. You should still see a doctor when the weather clears, I said. Just to be safe. She agreed. We spent the rest of the afternoon in relative peace. The storm continued outside, but inside, my little house was warm and dry. I made more coffee, and we even played a few games of gin rummy that I found in a drawer. Patricia was surprisingly competitive, and I found myself almost enjoying her company when she was not in HOA president mode. Around 5 in the evening, my landline rang. It was Robert, Patricia's husband, checking in again. She assured him she was fine and that the storm was supposed to start clearing in the next few hours. He said he would come get her as soon as the roads were passable. After she hung up, Patricia looked at me. I really am sorry, Xavier, for everything, not just today but the grass violation and the barn color inspection. I have been treating you and probably everyone else in the HOA like criminals instead of neighbors. I appreciate that, I said. And I hope you mean it. I do, she said. When I get home, I am going to call an emergency board meeting. We need to revise how we handle complaints and violations. And I think we need to implement a policy where we contact residents before issuing violations, except in extreme circumstances. That sounds like a good start, I said. The storm finally started to let up around 7 that evening. By 8, the ice had stopped falling, though everything was still coated in it. The temperature was supposed to drop into the teens overnight, which meant everything would stay frozen until at least mid-morning tomorrow, when the sun could start doing some work. Around 9, I heard the sound of a truck with chains on its tires coming down my driveway. Robert had arrived in what looked like a heavy-duty pickup with 4-wheel drive and proper winter equipment. He was a tall man in his 60s, with a kind face and worry lines around his eyes. Patricia met him at the door, and he immediately pulled her into a hug. "Thank God you are okay," he said. "I have been worried sick." "I am fine, honey. Xavier took good care of me." Robert turned to me and extended his hand. "Thank you so much for helping her. I know Patricia can be difficult sometimes." "She was just in a bad situation," I said diplomatically. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not everyone," Robert said, "especially given how Patricia has treated some people in the HOA." Patricia had the grace to look ashamed. "Robert, please." "No, he is right," she said to me. I have not always been the best neighbor or HOA president, but I am going to do better." They left shortly after, with Robert promising to send a tow truck for Patricia's Lexus as soon as one was available. I watched them carefully navigate back up my driveway, Robert taking it slow and steady. Once they were gone, I went out to assess the damage to my barn. The gouge in the siding was not as bad as it could have been. The post had taken most of the impact, and while it would need some cosmetic repair, the structural integrity seemed fine. I would have to do a more thorough inspection in daylight, but I was cautiously optimistic. I spent the next day clearing what ice I could from my driveway and paths. The sun helped, though the temperature stayed below freezing until almost noon. The tow truck came around 2 in the afternoon, and it took them nearly an hour to safely extract Patricia's Lexus from its resting place against my barn. The driver whistled when he saw it. "Lady's lucky she did not hit that post head-on," he said. "Might have gone through the windshield." I nodded, not wanting to think about what could have happened. 2 days after the ice storm, I received an email from Patricia. It was formal but warm, thanking me again for my help and informing me that the HOA board had met and voted to implement new policies regarding complaints and violations. From now on, they would contact residents first before issuing any violation notices, and they were setting up a mediation process for disputes between neighbors. She also mentioned that she had spoken with the neighbor who filed the complaint about my barn. It turned out to be Walter Simmons, an elderly man who lived about half a mile away. He apparently had gotten confused and thought the occasional cars at my place were customers rather than friends. Patricia had clarified the situation with him, and he had withdrawn his complaint with an apology. The email ended with an invitation to attend the next HOA meeting as a resident representative. She said they were trying to get more community input and less board dictation. I appreciated the gesture, though I was not sure if I wanted to get that involved in HOA politics. A week later, I received another surprise. Patricia and Robert showed up at my door with a check. "What is this?" I asked, looking at the amount. "It was for $1,500. "For the damage to your barn," Patricia said. "Our insurance is covering my car, but the damage to your property is my responsibility. This should cover the repairs and then some." "You did not have to do this," I said. "Insurance would have covered it." "I know," Patricia said, "but I wanted to. It is the right thing to do." I accepted the check and we chatted for a few minutes. Patricia looked different somehow, more relaxed. She was wearing jeans and a casual sweater instead of her usual designer outfits, and her hair was in a simple ponytail. "You look good," I said. "Different but good," she laughed. "I am trying something new. Robert says I need to stop acting like I am going to a board meeting every time I leave the house. He might be right." "Sounds like Robert is a smart man," I said. "He is," Patricia agreed. "I am very lucky to have him." They left after declining my offer of coffee, saying they had other stops to make. I later found out from a neighbor that Patricia had been going around to various residents, apologizing for past overzealous enforcement and asking for input on HOA policies. It was a remarkable transformation. The next HOA meeting was apparently quite different from previous ones. According to my neighbor, Martha, who had been attending for years, Patricia actually listened to residents instead of talking over them. They voted to reduce several excessive fines and to eliminate some of the more ridiculous regulations, like the grass height requirement that had gotten me a violation notice. I did eventually attend an HOA meeting about 2 months after the ice storm. It was held in the community center, and about 40 residents showed up, which Martha told me was twice the usual attendance. Patricia ran the meeting efficiently but not dictatorially. She asked for input, took notes, and actually seemed to care about what people had to say. When the topic of property violations came up, Patricia addressed it directly. "I want to apologize to everyone here for how I have handled enforcement in the past. I let my desire to maintain our community standards override common sense and basic decency. Going forward, we are going to approach violations as opportunities for dialogue, not punishment." There was a murmur of approval from the crowd. One man, who I later learned had been fined multiple times for various minor infractions, stood up. "Does this mean you are going to refund our fines?" Patricia hesitated. "We cannot refund fines that were technically valid under the bylaws at the time. However, we are implementing a policy where any resident with outstanding fines can appeal them to the board for review. We will look at each case individually and make adjustments where appropriate." It was not a perfect solution, but it was fair. The man seemed satisfied with that answer. After the meeting, Patricia approached me. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know HOA meetings are not everyone's idea of a good time." "It was not bad," I said honestly. "Very different from what I expected based on stories I had heard." "I am trying," she said. "It is hard to change habits I have built up over 8 years, but I am trying." "It shows," I said. "And for what it is worth, I think you are doing a good job." She smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way I had not seen before. "That means a lot, especially coming from you." Life returned to normal after that, or as normal as it gets when you live in an HOA. I continued with my woodworking, and nobody complained about noise or imaginary customers. Patricia continued her transformation, becoming less of an HOA dictator and more of a community facilitator. About 6 months after the ice storm, the HOA held its annual election for board members. Patricia ran for president again, but this time she had competition. A younger woman named Sarah Chen, who had recently moved into the development, ran on a platform of modernizing the HOA and making it more responsive to residents. The election was surprisingly close. Patricia won, but only by a narrow margin. At the meeting where the results were announced, she addressed it head-on. "I see this close vote as a message from all of you," she said. "You want change and you want it faster than I have been delivering it. Sarah, I would like to invite you to join the board as vice president. I think your perspective would be valuable, and together we can make this HOA work for everyone." Sarah accepted, and the two of them formed an effective team. Patricia brought experience and knowledge of the bylaws, while Sarah brought fresh ideas and technological know-how. They set up an HOA website where residents could submit maintenance requests, file complaints, and access all the bylaws and regulations. They also started a quarterly newsletter that actually contained useful information, instead of just violation notices and rule reminders. I found myself getting more involved in the community as well. I started teaching woodworking classes in my barn on Saturday mornings for anyone interested. It was Patricia's idea, actually. She suggested it as a way to build community connections and to show that the HOA was not just about rules and regulations. The classes were a hit. I usually had between 5 and 10 people show up, ranging from teenagers to retirees. We made simple projects like cutting boards, picture frames, and small boxes. It was satisfying to share my knowledge and to see people take pride in creating something with their own hands. One of my regular students was Walter Simmons, the elderly man who had filed the original complaint about my barn. He apologized profusely the first time he came to a class. "I feel terrible about that complaint," he said. "I was not thinking straight. My eyesight is not what it used to be, and I just assumed the worst." "Water under the bridge," I assured him. "And hey, now you know what is actually going on in my barn." Walter turned out to have a real talent for woodworking. He told me he used to do carpentry when he was younger, but had gotten away from it over the years. Having the classes rekindled that passion, and he started spending more time in his own workshop at home. The ice storm and its aftermath became something of a legend in the community. People would joke about it at HOA meetings or community events. Remember when Patricia slid into Xavier's barn? Became shorthand for the old way of doing things versus the new. Patricia took it in stride, even laughing at herself. "I suppose if I had to have a defining moment," she said at one gathering, "literally sliding into someone's barn and then blaming them for it is pretty on brand for the old me." It was almost a year after the ice storm when things took an unexpected turn. I was working in my barn one Saturday afternoon between classes when Patricia showed up. She looked troubled. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Of course," I said, setting down my tools. "What is going on?" She took a deep breath. "I've been getting some pushback from a few board members about the changes we have been making. They think we have been too lenient, and that property values are going to suffer if we do not go back to stricter enforcement." "Who is pushing back?" I asked. "Douglas Winters and Helen McCarthy," she said. "They have been on the board for years, even longer than me. They remember when this HOA was first formed and take a very hard line on violations." I knew both of them by reputation. Douglas was a retired lawyer who loved arguing for the sake of arguing. Helen was a woman in her 70s who believed that any deviation from the rules would lead to chaos and property value collapse. "What are they proposing?" I asked. "They want to reinstate the old violation system," Patricia said. "First violation, then fine, no discussion. They also want to crack down on what they call unauthorized activities, which would include things like your woodworking classes." I felt a surge of anger. "But the classes are bringing the community together. They are not hurting anyone." "I know," Patricia said, "but Douglas found some obscure bylaw about commercial activities on residential properties. He is claiming that because you are teaching people, it counts as a commercial activity even though you are not charging anything." "That is ridiculous," I said. "I agree," Patricia said, "but I am only one vote on a 5-person board. Sarah will vote with me, but that is only 2. If Douglas and Helen can get just one more board member on their side, they will have a majority." "What can we do?" I asked. Patricia looked at me with determination. "We need to show the board and the community what we stand to lose if we go back to the old ways." "I am thinking a community meeting. Not an official HOA meeting, but a gathering where people can share their experiences and opinions." It was a good idea. We spent the next week organizing what we called a community coffee. We set it up in the community center on a Sunday afternoon and invited every resident in the development. We made it clear this was not an official HOA meeting, but rather an informal discussion about the future of the community. About 60 people showed up, which was impressive considering the development only had about 150 homes. Patricia opened the gathering with a brief explanation of the situation, carefully avoiding names but making it clear that some board members wanted to return to stricter enforcement policies. Then, she opened the floor to anyone who wanted to share their thoughts. The response was overwhelmingly in favor of the new, more relaxed approach. Person after person stood up to talk about how much better the community felt now. A young mother talked about how she no longer felt anxious every time she left her kids' toys in the yard overnight. An elderly couple mentioned that they appreciated being contacted first about their peeling fence instead of just receiving a fine. Multiple people brought up my woodworking classes and how it had helped them meet their neighbors. Walter Simmons gave a particularly moving speech about how the classes had given him a new lease on life, and how he had made friends with people he had only waved to before. Douglas Winters was in attendance, sitting in the back with his arms crossed. When Patricia asked if he wanted to respond to anything that had been said, he stood up. "This is all very touching," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But feelings are not facts. Facts are that our property values are what they are because of strict HOA enforcement. If we let standards slip, we might as well be living in a neighborhood with no HOA at all." "You have any evidence that property values have dropped since we changed our policies?" Sarah Chen asked. She had clearly done her homework because she had a laptop open in front of her. Douglas hesitated. "Well, no, but it has only been a year." "Actually," Sarah said, "I pulled the recent sales data for our development. In the past year, 3 homes have sold, and all 3 sold for above asking price, with 2 of them getting into bidding wars. The average sale price is up 8% from the previous year." The room murmured with interest. Douglas looked flustered. "That could be due to the overall market," he protested. "True," Sarah agreed. "But comparable homes in other nearby HOA communities only saw an average increase of 3%. Our development is outperforming the market." Helen McCarthy stood up next. "Young lady, statistics can be manipulated to say anything you want. What matters is maintaining order and standards." "I agree that standards matter," Patricia said, stepping in. "But standards should serve the community, not control it. We are not talking about letting people paint their houses neon pink or leave trash in their yards. We are talking about treating people with respect and giving them a chance to address issues before punishing them." The discussion continued for another hour. By the end, it was clear where the community stood. Even some people who I expected to side with Douglas and Helen spoke in favor of the new approach. The next official board meeting was tense. Douglas and Helen arrived with a prepared proposal to reinstate the old violation system and to ban unauthorized activities on residential properties. But the third board member they needed, a man named Frank Peterson, surprised everyone. "I have been thinking a lot about this," Frank said, "and I have been listening to the community. I think Patricia and Sarah are right. We need to continue moving in a more community-focused direction, not go backward." Douglas was furious. "You are making a huge mistake, all of you." "That is your opinion," Patricia said calmly, "and you are entitled to it. But the board has spoken, and we are going to continue with our current policies." Helen shook her head. "Fine, but do not come crying to me when property values plummet and this place turns into a slum." "I will take that risk," Patricia said. Douglas and Helen both resigned from the board the following week, citing irreconcilable differences with the board's direction. I expected Patricia to be upset, but she seemed almost relieved. "They were never going to change," she told me. And having them on the board was like trying to drive forward while someone held the parking brake. Now we can really move forward. The board held a special election to fill the 2 vacant seats. A surprising number of people ran, which was apparently unheard of in previous years. 2 new members were elected: Tom Rodriguez, a firefighter in his 40s, and Deanne Foster, a retired teacher in her 60s. Both had campaigned on platforms of continuing the community-focused approach. With the new board in place, things really started to change. They revised the bylaws to remove many of the more restrictive regulations. They set up a fund to help elderly residents with maintenance issues they could not afford or physically do themselves. They organized community events like movie nights in the park and holiday celebrations. My woodworking classes continued and even expanded. I started offering an advanced class on Thursday evenings, and I began teaching some specialized workshops on things like furniture restoration and decorative carving. Patricia stopped by one Saturday to observe a class. Afterwards, she said, "You know, a year ago I would have been here to shut this down. Now I am here because I am thinking about signing up myself." "You should," I said. "Next beginner's session starts in 2 weeks." She did sign up, and she was terrible at it. Her first cutting board was crooked, her measurements were constantly off, and she managed to sand through the finish on her first picture frame project. But she kept coming back, laughing at her mistakes and celebrating her small victories. "I think this is good for me," she told me one day. "It reminds me that being bad at something is okay. I spent so much of my life trying to be perfect and in control that I forgot it is okay to struggle and make mistakes." "You are getting better," I assured her. "Your last project actually turned out pretty well." "It is lopsided," she pointed out. "Slightly lopsided," I corrected. "But it is functional and you made it yourself. That counts for something." The following winter, we got another ice storm, though not as severe as the one that had started everything. This time, the community came together to help each other. People with trucks and chains helped those who needed rides. Neighbors checked on each other to make sure everyone had power and heat. The HOA sent out an email reminding everyone to stay safe and to reach out if they needed anything. Patricia sent me a personal text that simply said, "Staying home this time. Learned my lesson." I replied with a laughing emoji and an offer to come check on her and Robert if they needed anything. She thanked me but said they were well prepared. The storm passed without incident, at least for our community. There were no dramatic slides into barns, no arguments about driveway maintenance, just neighbors helping neighbors get through a difficult situation. As spring arrived, the HOA organized a community cleanup day. About 40 people showed up to pick up winter debris, plant flowers in the common areas, and generally spruce things up. It was a far cry from the old days when the HOA would fine people for not maintaining their properties to standard. Now people were voluntarily working together to make the community better. During a break, Patricia and I sat on a bench overlooking the community park. The flower beds were starting to bloom, and kids were playing on the playground while their parents chatted nearby. "This is what I wanted all along," Patricia said. "A community where people were happy and proud to live. I just went about it all wrong for so many years." "You figured it out eventually," I said. "That counts for something." "With a lot of help," she said. "If I had not slid into your barn that day, I probably would have kept going the way I was. It took literally crashing into a wall or a barn to make me see what I had become." "Well, I would not recommend your method for self-improvement," I joked, "but I am glad something good came out of it." "Me too," she said. "Me too." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, watching the community we had both, in our own ways, helped to build. It was not perfect. There were still disputes between neighbors, still maintenance issues to address, still the occasional violation that needed to be handled. But it felt like a real community now, not just a collection of houses governed by arbitrary rules. That evening, I went back to my barn to work on a new project. I was building a picnic table for the community park, a donation that Patricia had enthusiastically accepted when I offered. As I worked, measuring and cutting and sanding, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. I had bought this property looking for peace and quiet, a place to pursue my hobbies without interference. Instead, I had found myself in the middle of an HOA drama that could have gone very badly. But through a combination of circumstances, stubbornness, and a willingness to help someone in need even when they did not deserve it, I had ended up with something better than solitude. I had ended up with a community. The picnic table took me 3 weeks to complete. It was one of my better projects, sturdy and well crafted with some decorative touches that I was particularly proud of. When it was time to install it in the park, a group of neighbors showed up to help. Patricia and Robert were there, along with Sarah, Tom, Deanne, Walter, and about a dozen others. We set it up under a large oak tree that provided good shade. Patricia insisted on christening it with a community lunch, so we ended up having an impromptu picnic right then and there. People brought food from home, and we spent the afternoon eating, talking, and enjoying the beautiful spring weather. At one point, Douglas Winters walked by the park. He slowed down, looking at the gathering with what might have been longing or might have been disdain. It was hard to tell. Patricia waved to him, but he just nodded curtly and kept walking. "You think he regrets leaving the board?" I asked. Patricia shrugged. "Maybe, but if he does, he will never admit it. Some people are too invested in being right to admit when they are wrong." "That could have been you," I pointed out gently. "I know," she said. "I got lucky. I had Robert at home telling me I was going down the wrong path, and then I literally crashed and had to face the consequences of my actions. Douglas does not have that. He has Helen, who reinforces all his worst instincts." "That is sad," I said. "It is," Patricia agreed. "But you cannot save everyone. All you can do is try to do better yourself and hope it inspires others." As the sun started to set, people began packing up and heading home. I stayed behind to clean up some of the trash and make sure the new picnic table was properly secured. Patricia stayed to help. "Thank you," she said as we worked. "Not just for the table, but for everything. For taking me in during the storm, for giving me a chance to change, for not holding my past behavior against me." "You did the hard work," I said. "I just provided some shelter during a storm." "It was more than that," she insisted. "You treated me with kindness when I did not deserve it." That made all the difference. We finished cleaning up and walked back toward the parking area together. The community was quiet now, with lights starting to come on in windows as families settled in for the evening. It looked peaceful and welcoming, exactly what a community should be. Over the next few years, the HOA continued to evolve. Patricia served 2 more terms as president before deciding not to run again. Sarah took over, bringing even more innovations like a community app and a skill-sharing program where residents could offer services to each other. My woodworking classes became an established part of the community, with multiple sessions running throughout the year. The barn that Patricia had crashed into that icy day became something of a community landmark. People would point it out to new residents and tell the story of how the HOA president slid into it during an ice storm and how that incident transformed the entire community. It became a reminder that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes. I never did get fined for running an unauthorized business out of my barn. The bylaws were changed to encourage residents to share their skills and hobbies with the community. My classes were even highlighted in the HOA newsletter as an example of the kind of community engagement they wanted to promote. Patricia and I remained friends, bonded by that strange shared experience during the ice storm. We would often laugh about it, how she had blamed me for her sliding down my icy driveway, how she had insisted on sitting in the freezing cold rather than accept help at first, how terrified they had both been. "I was insufferable," Patricia would say, shaking her head. "You were scared and in shock," I would counter. "People do not always act rationally in situations like that. Still, I should have known better than to go out in that storm in the first place." Well, at least something good came from it, and something good really had come from it. A community that had been divided by overzealous rule enforcement had come together. People who had been strangers became friends. An HOA that had been seen as an adversary became a facilitator of community engagement. Looking back on that day when I heard the crash against my barn, I could have handled things differently. I could have left Patricia outside to deal with the consequences of her poor decision. I could have been vindictive or petty, using her vulnerability against her. But I had chosen kindness instead, and that choice had rippled out in ways I never could have predicted. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if the ice storm had not occurred, if Patricia had not slid into my barn, if we had not been forced to spend those hours together. Would the HOA have continued on its authoritarian path? Would Patricia have ever changed? Would I still be just a guy on the edge of the development, keeping to himself and his woodworking? I suppose there is no way to know. What I do know is that one icy day, one accident, and one choice to show compassion changed everything. It turned an adversarial relationship into a friendship, transformed an HOA from a source of anxiety into a genuine community organization, and showed me that sometimes getting involved, even when you would rather stay on the sidelines, can lead to something better than you could have found alone. The barn still has a small scar from where Patricia's Lexus hit it. I never fully repaired that gouge in the wood. I kept it as a reminder of where we started and how far we have come. Sometimes during my classes, when new students ask about it, I tell them the story. They always laugh at the image of the HOA president sliding down an icy driveway and crashing into my barn, then blaming me for it. But I always make sure to tell them the rest of the story too. How that moment of crisis became a moment of transformation. How facing the consequences of her actions helped Patricia become a better person and a better leader. How a community came together after years of being divided. Because that is the real story, not the crash itself, but what came after. And every time I tell it, I am reminded that people can change, that communities can heal, and that sometimes the worst days can lead to the best outcomes. All it takes is a willingness to show compassion, even to those who do not seem to deserve it, and the courage to admit when you are wrong and try to do better. That is the legacy of the day Patricia slid into my barn during the ice storm, and it is a legacy I am proud to be part of.